please welcome wildlife filmmaker and National Geographic Fellow, Sandesh Kadur.
Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Was it a late night for some of you? Well, welcome back to day 2 of the Explorers Symposium. It's an honor to be here with all of you again this morning. For those of you who are here for the first day, welcome. And my name is Sandesh Kadur. I'm a wildlife filmmaker. My Mexican friends call me Sandwich because they can never pronounce Sandesh for the life of them. But I do feel sandwiched here between all of you, the audience, and the presenters backstage. So I'm just a little bit of a vehicle, just getting you from me to them, and as much of them as possible. Now, one quick reminder, I want all of you to look to the side, look at the hashtag NatGeoFest, and please don't forget to hashtag some of these moments, and get the messages from these presenters out into the world. And these are very important messages, and you need to magnify their voice by hashtagging whatever hits the chord within you, send it out there. Get that message out there. So, yesterday we had an incredible presentation. We were started off with Jane, who brought in the astronauts, and they took us on a journey to outer space. And from outer space into the depths of the oceans and into this very room where we had a very cool Sumatran rhino. How cool was that? I wish we could bring him back on stage at some point. But for those of you who hadn't seen him here yesterday, I think you can still see him in the dining hall. Yeah. And what really fills me with the biggest reason for hope is our young stewards. So 3 of them were up on stage yesterday. Sahar, Felix, and Melati. They gave us reason for hope. Their talks were powerful and spellbinding. And that is what this yellow rectangle is all about. It fills us with stories of hope for the future. Gives us the most powerful images combined with the most powerful stories, and takes us on a journey like you've never been before. But don't let that yellow rectangle deceive you. It had a disastrous effect on my own academic career. Growing up in India, the most exciting thing for me was the latest issue of the magazine at the local library, which was always a few months late, of course. But going there and looking at the magazine transported to places that I could never, ever dream of going to. And even before I could speak English, the images were what caught my attention. And that's when I realized the power of visual imagery, the ability for them to transcend boundaries imposed by language. And that's what got me to doing what I'm doing here now. And of course, this yellow rectangle made textbooks look so boring in comparison. And even though I scoured through every magazine I could find, none of the things I read in the books ever found them in the exams. And I failed high school. And that's what exiled me from Bangalore, India, to Brownsville, Texas. That's when I learned to say y'all, listen to country songs. And that's what brought me here in some convoluted way or another. My college professor bought me my first camera and sent me off on a journey back to India. So much to my parents' dismay, I dropped out of college, and I ended up becoming a wildlife filmmaker and capturing wildlife around the world, big cats in India. And National Geographic, for the last couple of years, have helped me live my dream of becoming a filmmaker, becoming a photographer. And the last couple of years, I've spent documenting India's big cats. And it's not just the big cats, the tigers, the snow leopards, the lions, and the leopards. It's also the small cats. India has more species of cats than anywhere else in the world. How many species? Any guesses? 15. 15 species of big cats, including 15 species of cats, including small cats like this one. Who is that? Garfield? That's the ever grumpy looking Pallas's cat. I'm sure he was the inspiration behind Garfield. So that's what I spent my time doing, documenting these cats, and I had this incredible opportunity to rear these orphaned clouded leopard cubs. And over the course of 2 years, we released them back into the wild, and in the process, I lost all my hair, as you can see. But nevertheless, my job as a storytelling fellow with National Geographic is to combine the incredible spiritual, cultural, human world with the natural world. And somewhere in there is the balance of hope. And hope, as the Dalai Lama says, is the very basis of life. And that is the topic for most of our talks today. So it gives me great honor to introduce someone I had the pleasure of meeting a few months ago, last fall, at the Hong Kong Explorers Festival. At the end of my talk, he gave me the coolest handshake ever, and I thought he's a very, very cool guy immediately. So please join me in welcoming and giving a big welcome for the President and CEO of National Geographic Society, Tracy Wolstencroft.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
This moment right now, this is about you, our explorers. You are the adventure heroes who help us to discover and reveal this extraordinary world that we call home. Now, I have to say that you give me great humility every day with the extraordinary work that you do. Because you have to understand, I can't say when someone asks me what I do, I cannot say that I'm Guillermo de Anda and that I discover Mayan caves underneath Chichen Itza. And as Guillermo says, that I help discover the footprints of humankind's past. Is Guillermo here this morning? I think Guillermo's still in those caves. I can't say that I've contributed to one of Africa's conservation successes, the renaissance of the Gorongosa National Park, like Dominique Gonçalves. Is Dominique here? Okay, over two, there she is, okay. And Dominique, who tracks and monitors elephants, and in so doing gives inspiration to those young Mozambican girls who see in her the dreams that they will someday have. I can't say that I'm Lynn Johnson. Where's Lynn? Not here. I can't say that I'm Lynn Johnson and that I know how to gracefully disappear into a scene or a story to capture the people's inner characters. I can't say that I launched the Youth Climate Summit to inspire students to understand the science and impacts of climate change, like Kavita Gupta. Kavita? As Kavita says, the goal of science education is not to pass another test, but to look at the world with a scientific view. And I can't say that I'm Derek or Beverly Joubert. Where are they? Who have committed their lives to the big cats of Africa, teaching and inspiring the world to care about their plight and driving action to protect their natural habitats. And just to be clear, I could discuss for the next hour or two all the ways that each and every one of you are illuminating, educating, and catalyzing action to make this world a better place. No, I can't say that I'm an explorer in that regard, and certainly not in all the ways that you are. But I promise you this, I and everyone else with me at National Geographic are explorers with you in that we are eager to explore what we can do together to honor and enhance the heritage that has made National Geographic one of the most loved and revered organizations on Earth. We stand on the shoulders of our founders and forerunners, and now we have an opportunity, we have a duty to broaden those shoulders through the kind of diversity the explorers in this room represent. It is only through diversity that we will come up with the best ideas and catalyze the best solutions. Along with diversity, the spirit of exploration and discovery is truly the soul and power of this institution, and its influence and importance will only grow in the decades ahead. How did Lee Berger put it yesterday? Exploration never stops. So let me share with you two recent examples. In 1963, National Geographic was part of the first American expedition to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Today, it's 56 years later, and we had a diverse team of scientists and storytellers on the world's tallest mountain last month. And make no mistake, we didn't go to Everest this time to discover Everest. We went to Everest to discover what the sacred mountain could reveal to us about the health of the planet Earth. And stay tuned, those revelations are coming tomorrow morning. Along with our partners from ROLEX, who are here today and over the next several days, including Arnaud Bosch and Florence Siebert, we are learning about the changing climate in the crucial environment than ever before. And the rate of change, as you will see tomorrow, is staggering. Our photographer, Pete Mueller, has said that the stories of climate change don't scream, they whisper. So we are using all of our technology to listen and help mankind here in time. It has always been our method to make a discovery, photograph it, film it, and tell the story. Today, we may also be called on to act on it, to support and partner with others whose hearts and minds urge them to make an impact. The call to act can literally come from any corner of the world. A month ago, our explorer Albert Lin was in Micronesia to film the ancient ruins of Nam Madol for a National Geographic series about lost cities. To those who know Albert, it will be no surprise to learn that along the way, he befriended the new president of Micronesia, a gentleman named David Panuelo. And Albert learned that one of the president's first trips was to Washington, D.C., just 2 weeks ago. And leveraging this knowledge, Albert instinctively connected us to arrange a meeting. When we sat down with President Panuelo a few days later, I barely had a chance to say how honored we were to meet him before he could say, please, I have loved National Geographic since I was a child, reading the magazine and learning about the world through you. And how many times have all of us heard that in this room? President Panuelo went on to talk about his country's enormous ocean space, roughly 3 million square kilometers, or approximately the size of India, and how he wanted to help his nation safeguard the resources and maximize the economic benefits of that sea around Micronesia. He went on to say, I know we're a small country, but will National Geographic help us? To which we said, you may be a small country, but you have a huge idea. Our Pristine Seas team is now coordinating with 2 different partners, Ocean 5 and the Wyss Foundation, as we have conversations to advance this idea. But here's the key. And I want to emphasize that this meeting started in the mind of an explorer who went to Micronesia to film ruins and saw a way to save the seas. He went to explore the past and helped to catalyze action to preserve the future. This ability to connect the dots, cross-pollinate ideas, leverage our knowledge in all the ways the world is interconnected, this is an important part of the magic of National Geographic. It is what distinguishes us from any other organization. It is why we support disciplines ranging from archaeology to the antiquities, space, education, conservation, and everywhere in between. When I asked Albert how his mind connected these two opportunities, he said, the thing that defines us as explorers is not our skill in any one discipline. It's the ability to see the forest and the trees, to understand ourselves and our world, and to move through life with an open heart and a willingness to imagine. We should all be willing to imagine, and I don't use that word lightly. We're joined this week, including this morning, by members of Disney's executive leadership team, including Peter Rice and Bob Chapek. And if we've learned anything from them in our opening months together as partners, it is the power of imagination. Remember, it was the visionary Walt Disney himself who said, all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. There is no doubt that explorers have the courage to imagine and pursue their dreams. You get an idea, you make it a passion, it becomes an obsession, and then nothing stops you. It's easy to dream big dreams and then get scared and give up. But explorers are unique because explorers are unafraid. Not just unafraid of physical risk, but you're unafraid of being who you want to be, going where you want to go, doing what you want to do, and seeking what you want to find. And that's why you're heroes to millions of people around the world who want to see you, they want to watch you, they want to follow you, they want to learn from you because you are living their dreams. And that is why you are heroes, especially to us here at National Geographic. On every voyage, we go with you. Whether it's in the classroom, up the mountain, behind the camera, on a dig, or at the bottom of the ocean. It's your expedition, but it is our common mission. When two or more people come together for the sake of an aim or a goal, those people create a culture. And that culture has a soul. And the soul at National Geographic is what makes us exceptional. We are greater than the sum of our numbers. We are more than any one of us here. We are the spirit we create by gathering together. And our spirit is magical. You can feel it this week. We can do anything. And that is why you can feel the electricity around campus this week. The thrill of having you here, because speaking for all of us who work here every day, running this organization and supporting its purpose, you are not only living your dreams, you are living our dreams too. Thank you and welcome home. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the spirit and truly the soul of this institution is our legacy of exploration, discovery, and curiosity. Since our founding in 1988, National Geographic has illuminated the wonder of our world, educated the next generation of planetary stewards, but also catalyzed action across many different areas, one of which is conservation. So allow me to touch on a few examples. In 1915, Gilbert H. Grosvenor, the National Geographic Society's first full-time employee, longtime editor, and the namesake of this auditorium, was so inspired by a trip to California's Sierra Nevada region that he devoted the contents of the entire April 1916 National Geographic magazine to America's scenic wonders. He ensured that every U.S. senator and representative received a copy of that issue, significantly influencing the legislation that created the National Park Service later that year. Fast forward to 1999, when explorer Mike Fay made his mega transect across the Congo Basin of Africa to survey the ecological and environmental status of the region. He covered 2,000 miles in 465 days. Mike shared what he found in his trek with the president of Gabon, leading to the creation of 13 new national parks. Since 2015, an interdisciplinary group of scientists, including explorers Steve Boyce and Ajani Costa, have surveyed the river system feeding the Okavango Delta, one of the largest freshwater wetlands in southern Africa and a critical source of water for 1 million people. Building on the work of the Okavango Wilderness Project, National Geographic recently formalized a 4-year partnership with the Angolan government to protect the river basin and the headwaters. All of this in the name of conservation. It's in that spirit we are honored this morning to present Hansjörg Wyss, the first ever National Geographic Philanthropist of the Year award. Hansjörg came to the United States as a Swiss citizen in his early 20s to further his education. He went west for the summer, working for the Colorado Highway Department, and spent his free time climbing and hiking on the public lands in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. It was there he developed a passion for America's national park and the association between democracy, freedom, and conservation. The idea that people should have access to these lands and a say in how they are managed and protected. Hansjörg's entrepreneurial mind and his success in the medical device industry allowed him to invest in some of society's deepest challenges as well as deepest opportunities. And he has pledged to donate more than half of his wealth to charitable causes. His first donation toward the protection of nature was $200 to the Wilderness Society. Times have changed in 30 years. Last October, Hansjörg announced that he was donating $1 billion over the next decade to help accelerate land and ocean conservation around the world. This is the single largest commitment in history from an individual for protected areas. The Wyss Foundation has invested in National Geographic to help rapidly expand the protection of planet Earth's lands and oceans so the current and future generations can drink clean water, breathe clean air, and experience the wonders of the natural world. All to help promote the goal of protecting 30% of the planet by 2030 for biodiversity. None of this, I should say, is possible without the support and leadership of indigenous peoples. This idea of community-based conservation is a core tenet of National Geographic's Last Wild Places initiative, which seeks to help protect the places that sustain life on Earth. And this concept is perfectly aligned with Hansjörg Wyss's own views on locally led conservation, as expressed last October when he announced his billion-dollar commitment. Let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of Hansjörg Wyss in his own words through a beautiful photo essay by National Geographic photographer Pete Mueller.
My first trip to America was in 1958, and it was with a propeller plane from Switzerland right on to Denver. I fell in love with the landscapes of the West. It was so inspiring when you see the change of light in the Grand Canyon over a day. It's just unbelievable. And if you wake up suddenly and there is snow in your tent and, halfway between the river and the rim, it just makes you feel good. I don't have any other explanation. I did a lot of what I consider very important decisions in my businesses while I was hiking or while I was sitting at the river, and it suddenly just comes together. I made a lot of decisions like that. I always have trouble with the word philanthropy. What does it really mean? You have an opportunity not to do good, but to bring positive change to organizations, to people, to the landscape. And I just feel that something you just have to do. I mean, Jefferson said, if life has given you fame and fortune, you have a duty to give it back to society.
All for you.
Thank you.
All for you. Okay. You're just going to stand here.
Nice.
I don't know if you can notice, but Hansjörg is wearing his hiking shoes so he can immediately go out and explore what's happening out there. Hansjörg, it is our pleasure to welcome you to National Geographic.
Thank you.
And to offer you our first and inaugural award as Philanthropist of the Year. We are deeply appreciative.
Thank you very much.
This is for you. I don't know where you're going to put this with all your other memorabilia, but this is for you. There we go. We're going to ask Jonathan Baillie to come out. Okay. I'm going to ask Jonathan Baillie to come out. Jonathan is our chief scientist, has spent some recent time with Hansjörg, himself deeply committed to conservation. And now you two gentlemen are going to have a conversation. Fantastic. So again, absolutely.
Thank
Congratulations.
you. Thank you very much for this wonderful award, and I'm very honored to be here today.
We are honored that you're here.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Hansjörg. I know everybody in the audience here, and myself included, want to know the key first question, which is, what inspired you to give $1 billion to the natural world? What made you want to focus on a target of protecting 30% of the planet by 2030?
Well, we started defining that target years ago when we started work support President Clinton in establishing national monuments. From then into help to create parks. Mm-hmm. And we spent close to $400 million over the last 20 years. Helping NGOs, helping indigenous people, helping park services and things. So this was just a continuation. That article was a continuation of what we were going to do in the future.
Okay.
And the number could be higher, it could be lower. It depends on the opportunities. I hope it's going to be higher than $1 billion.
Yeah, well,
personally.
And hopefully we get more than 30% as well.
Yes, of course.
Yes. So Tracy talked about the Colorado Highway Department and your first job when you came over to America. What exactly was that job when you headed out west?
That job, spending 4 months with the Colorado State Highway Department, my first job, they assigned me to a crew of people who were born and lived in the southern United States. My English was reasonably okay, but I didn't understand their accent at all. And it was a surveying crew, and we surveyed the forest part of the interstate highway that eventually was going to go to the Eisenhower Tunnel under Loveland Pass. So I was there the lowest on the totem pole, and I had a hammer, and I was put the sticks in. Little did I know that I already had a very advanced degree in mapping and in surveying, etc. So for about 4 or 5 weeks, you know, I found my way. And then I told them they could do certain things a little differently, and they accepted it. So that was fun.
And what was your impression of the landscape of the West and the people?
It was unbelievable. I had never seen anything like it. Remember, there were no interstate highway system. It took you 9 hours to drive from Denver to Aspen. The roads were like this, but there were these wild, beautiful open spaces on the western side of the Rockies. And for the first time, I saw the national monuments there. It's now a national park, the Great Sand Dunes. And you just can't believe when you come from a country that is only 24,000 square miles or 44,000 square kilometers, and you see these spaces, and you see the sky changing, and you see, it's just unbelievable.
Yes. But you've come from a beautiful country as well. Obviously, you're born and burned. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and then who really inspired you to start engaging with nature, connecting with the natural world?
Well, I grew up in Bern. Bern is the capital of Switzerland, for all you don't know. And we speak a language which you don't understand. The Germans can't understand. It's called Berndeutsch, and it's schwer, sehr schwer zu verstehen. Also die meeste hier verstehen das nicht. But we'll switch back to English.
Okay. Thank you.
That's fine.
Thank you. We could do French.
Well, but you see, Switzerland, people think that the country is not really open for exploration, for hiking, etc. The country has some very interesting laws. Every forest is public. There are no private forests which you cannot enter. The government owns a large part of the mountains above 2,000 meters. It's all public. And there are some rules from the Middle Ages where you can walk between fields that are private owned by a farmer, but you're permitted to walk between those fields. So the country, in a way, is very open to exploration, to hiking, to walking, etc. And I grew up in a very small apartment, but 200 yards from our apartment was both the soccer field, which was watered, and there was a huge forest where our kids explored. In the winter, we built sled runs, etc. And so we were always very close to nature. We were close to the natural, world. And we were within 30 minutes with a postal bus from skiing, from the Prealps, which are very favorite for hikers from throughout Switzerland. So I was living in an artificial world, which was going to school and hiking school, and I lived in a natural world, which spent the Saturday afternoons in the forest.
And then you went on, obviously, to be extremely successful, leading a life-saving medical science company, then starting the Wyss Foundation and protecting about 20 times the size of Yellowstone, supporting the arts, supporting education, fighting for a higher minimum wage, starting an institute at Harvard, many other institutes around the world. So many successes, but if you were to look back at your life and think about what were the most meaningful successes for you, what are the top two?
Well, I think it's what we're doing now. It's the campaign for nature is really number one, because that's the most important, most threatening issue to the world. Yes. So that would be number one. And really number two is to improve as way as we can to work on social issues which affect specifically women, minorities, indigenous people, and so on. So it's working on to protect nature and to work on social issues.
That's wonderful.
I'd like to say quickly one thing.
Yes.
I'm honored tonight, but it's really, I really don't deserve this honor without you passing this honor to the people who work with me, to the people who support me, and to everybody in this room. So all of you really got this award, not I, not myself. And I think you should applaud yourself, because without the explorers, without support National Geographic, the Nature Conservancy, every small NGO, every small group that helped us and partners us, we wouldn't be here tonight.
Yes.
Today, sorry.
Let's have a round of applause for our explorers. Yeah. And on that note, and with your successful career, you have a lot of young explorers here. Many of them are just starting their careers, and they really want to make the world a better place, as you have. What would be your advice to somebody starting out that's trying to drive an ambitious career and change the world?
Try to figure out something you want to do and do it.
Yes.
I mean, it's so simple. I've seen many slogans out there while I was waiting for this wonderful moment, have a dream and then fulfill this dream, work on it, don't give up. You're all explorers. I know you're not going to give up.
Yes.
So
I think that's it. And I always say the same thing when I'm talking to young people is just focus on one thing, do it well, and commit your life to that. Yeah. And you will succeed. And
the other thing I'd advise is always make sure at the beginning of your career, you have a father figure around you that prevents you from big mistakes, that advises you, and also make sure you have friends around you that help you and you can trust.
Yes.
And I think if you had that two combinations, which I had in my career, I always had somebody protecting me. And now I have a board that tells me you can't do this. You haven't thought this through. And that's true. And if you look for those two groups of people around you, you'll be very successful. If you just keep going against the goal you've set yourself.
Yeah. And so you've got a big goal of 30 by 30. You've made a big bet. And the two goals, one is to get the world's governments to agree to 30 by 30, but then the other is to achieve it. And you've provided the resources really for both those initiatives. How hopeful are you that we're going to get there?
I have to be very hopeful. I just have to say we're going to get there. Because if I don't say that, I don't fulfill the advice I just gave. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
But the most important is not just to get there. The most important to persuade governments, NGOs, private people, all the money to support afterwards the activities to keep these places protected.
Yes.
Because you've seen many times in the world, you've seen the government declares a national park, gives a little bit of money, and then 10 years later, it's no more a park. It's a desert. No animals, no nothing. So it's always like that. People like to give money for a museum, but they never give money for the operation of the museum for the next 10 years. And the same goes for wild places. It's easy to declare them wild, but then you need the money to support the organizations to keep them wild.
Yes.
So that's what I hope for. That's what's going to happen.
Well, a big part will be the resources in getting there. And so we're extremely grateful for what you have done and that you're setting an example to philanthropists around the world. And hopefully many will follow in your footsteps. Hansjörg, your award is well deserved. We thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to speak with all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hansjörg. Thank you.
Thank you. That was okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you know where you're sitting here?
Good.
Right here. I don't know where you are. Thank you. Congratulations.
Wow, that was really inspiring. The single largest contribution for conservation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. So when we think about protecting some of the last wild places on Earth, there's this benchmark in the conservation community called 30 by 30. The concept of protecting 30% of the planet by the year 2030. The next group of speakers will dive in deeper and explain more about this concept and the science that goes into this incredible planetary goal. Please join me in welcoming founder of National Geographic's Pristine Seas project and National Geographic Explorer in Residence, Enric Sala, Vice President of Species Conservation for the Wildlife Conservation Society, Elizabeth Bennett, and my 16% Indian brother and very close friend, conservation biologist and National Geographic Fellow, Steve Boyes.
Actually, after Hansjörg's words, I don't know if we need to talk about 30 by 30. But and I wonder why 16%. That's so how many of you know what we're talking about here, 30 by 30? Well, almost everybody. Definitely we should go and... Okay, so my goal here is that after this session, all of you are able to stand up here and give a talk about why we need 30 by 30. Okay? And to get that, we need to, the emotional component was beautifully put forward by Hansjörg Wyss. Now let's talk about the brain for a little bit, the rationale. So why do we need to protect anything, right? And then how much? And then where? And how? And then the final question, of course, how much is it going to cost, right? So this is what we're going to try to do in the next 20 minutes. Somebody shaved 5 minutes out of our session. Wonderful. Okay, start with why. So you guys know we have to be concise. Why? Is there any problem? What's the problem? What are the drivers of this global loss of nature that we hear about? Liz.
Thanks very much. We all were probably aware of a recent UN report which said that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. And this includes 60% of all large mammals, which includes elephants, rhinos, great apes. Imagine a world without them. It includes 60% of all turtles and tortoises. And there was a report came out just last week that said that, in fact, plants are becoming extinct at an even greater rate than animals, with about 600 species of plants that have gone extinct in the last 250 years. And why is it happening? Well, one of the core reasons that it's happening is there's a lot more of us than there were. So when National Geographic was founded in 1888, there were about 1.5 billion people on the planet. Now there's more than 7.7 billion. So that means we need land for agriculture, and about 3/4 of the world's land area and most of the world's oceans are now impacted in some way by human activities. We only have 15% of the original tropical forest remaining, and only about 5% of the world's natural grasslands remaining. On top of that, we overexploit individual species by overlogging, overhunting, overfishing, which means that that's the greatest threat to certain species such as elephants, tigers, a lot of the ones that we really care about. And it matters, and why should we care about it? Partly because, as we've heard in a lot of talks this week so far, these species have intrinsic value. They're really special. And that's the basis of the Endangered Species Act, lots of other national legislations and international treaties, because we believe these species have a right to exist. They also have huge cultural value. They're bound into the cultures of people around the world. They're also extremely important for local livelihoods. So local people are very, particularly indigenous and traditional communities, are very dependent on wild species for their livelihoods. About 1 billion people worldwide depend on wild fish for their basic protein supply. And perhaps in some ways, most important of all, they provide essential ecosystem services in these biodiverse systems which keep us alive by mitigating climate change, by controlling the climate, by controlling water supplies. So for all those reasons, we're losing things, and it really matters.
You must be like me. I'm never invited back to a party. It's a lot of stats, and it's very depressing, but that's the truth, right? No, that's the truth. We have transformed. We are like the meteorite that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, right? We are transforming the planet at the geological scale. The good news, because I don't want you guys to walk out of this auditorium depressed, is that we can reverse that, right? And this is what we're going to focus on: protected areas that Hansjörg and many other people here have been working on. In the ocean, we see this very clearly. When you stop killing the fish, what happens? They take a longer time to die. They grow larger. They have more sex and produce lots of babies. And these protected areas in the ocean bring back life spectacularly. With my colleague and explorer Octavio Aburto here in Mexico, in 1999 we went to a place called Cabo Pulmo in Baja California. That place was part of a study we did across the Gulf of California and Mexico, and it was nothing remarkable about that place. It was as degraded as the rest of the Gulf of California. And the fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that they decided to do something that nobody expected. They stopped fishing completely. They convinced the Mexican government to create a national park, Cabo Pulmo National Park. We returned 10 years later, and you probably have seen this photo that Octavio took of a little diver, David and Goliath, with a humongous school, thousands of jacks. What had been a desert was now a kaleidoscope of life and color. The sharks were back, the jacks, the groupers. We saw it go from degraded to pristine in only 10 years. Right? So when we give space to nature, nature comes back, spectacularly. And same thing on the land. We know that these protected areas are the best way to bring back all that nature, all that biodiversity. But how do we create a protected area? And I'd like you, Steve, to tell us about, in a place as unknown to most people as Angola, right? Mm-hmm. How do you go about creating a national park there, a protected area?
Well, first we must acknowledge that, our planet's last wild places are those places that, for whatever reason, our modern society never settled or developed. Places that we hardly ever go. Places protected by their remote inaccessibility. But now, as Liz said, we have almost 8 billion people on the planet. We are entering these last Edens. Are we going there to destroy them? I'm not sure. But I do know that it's our cities that, and not the local communities, not the bushmeat hunters themselves, that are eating and wearing our last wildlife. Now, before I go into the how, I just want to take a moment for us all to acknowledge the indigenous local communities that live in these last wild places, these stewards and custodians, who are too often underrepresented in meetings and conferences like this around the world. They are the guardians of the central banks of global biodiversity, these last wild sanctuaries for the plants and animals we depend on. So they are the key. Now, in our work in the Angolan highlands, in a landscape that we call the Okavango Zambezi water tower, they have guided us in finding 70 new species to science currently being described, 93 new species for Angola, hundreds of species not known to be there. They've guided us to 19 source lakes surrounded by stratified peat deposits, peatlands, that were not known to be there, undocumented, fundamentally changing our understanding of the functioning of incredibly important river systems like the Okavango, the Kwando, and the Zambezi. Now, in our interactions with government, which is incredibly important, that's where the policy is going to come from, that's where new protected areas is going to come from. Early on, they said, what is the name of this landscape? Now, note this landscape is the size of the state of Wisconsin. It's got about 10,000 people living in it. There was no name for it in government. No one in government had been there for 50 years. So our team go and interview the local communities, ask them, what is the name of this place? And they have many names for small parts of it, but they wanted a name for the whole thing. And the name they came up with and promoted was La Cima Lia Moana, which means the source of life, a fonte de vida. Now, it had taken our 57 scientists working on the project 4 years to figure that out, something they had known all that time. They will be our guides in building this new future, this 30 by 30. But now, we have this incredible scientific foundation that we've created in the Okavango Wilderness Project. 60 publications are coming out into scientific journals, but that's often where they stay. What brings National Geographic into a place where it has so much impact is we can do conservation media. We can translate that science into inspiration at all levels in society, from those policymakers to the general public to those local communities on the ground. That is the magic of this. We need to catalyze this process. Those scientific papers sitting in a journal will take 20 years to create a protected area, and by then that landscape has been degraded on the trajectory we're on right now. So now we have to create platform for these discussions in these countries. We're not just working in Angola, it's with Botswana and Namibia, sharing information between those countries, conferences, symposia, stakeholder meetings, meetings at all levels. We're constantly meeting with people there, building capacity, building knowledge, inspiring them to take this on for themselves. We can't be prescriptive. I don't come from Angola, I don't come from Namibia, I don't come from Botswana. So my position is simply to explore, to illuminate, and to activate. And that is what we do in the Okavango Wilderness Project, and that is what we're going to do in the Last Wild Places program, the Campaign for Nature. It has to happen as a global movement. We can start with banning plastic straws, but we have to get to the point where we're welcoming biodiversity and wildlife into our cities and creating protected areas and landscapes and sanctuaries for global biodiversity, because we all depend on it.
Thank you, Steve. And you mentioned the science, you mentioned the media, but alone, science and media are just tools, right? And it's all about people. And we conducted a survey around the world, 12 countries, and other institutions have conducted similar surveys around the world. And when people are asked, how much of the planet you think is protected now? What do you think they say? They say, 30% is already protected. But Liz said that only 15% of the land is protected. And then also only 5% of the ocean is protected. Right? And when you ask people, how much do you want of the planet protected? And they say, overwhelmingly, half, 50%. People want a balance. And actually, what people want is what the science is telling us. We need half of the planet in natural state, with functioning forests, grasslands, wetlands, peat bogs, mangrove forest, seagrass beds, healthy ocean habitats. So nature can continue providing all these wonderful benefits like oxygen, flood protection, coastal protection, food, pollination, et cetera, to provide for us and for the rest of life on the planet. And this 30% of the planet in protected areas by 2030 is the necessary milestone. We need more. We need half of it. We need half of the planet in natural functioning state. But this 30% by 2030 is why we have partnered with the Wyss Foundation on this campaign for nature. And it's very easy. We only need to convince 196 countries. By October next year in China, in October, there's going to be a meeting which is going to be the equivalent of the Paris climate meeting, but for nature. And this is what we want to do. But then the next question is where? We're talking about 30%, but where that 30% should be. And Liz, you've been thinking a lot about how to prioritize the areas. Where should we place the protected areas now before it's too late?
Yeah, I'm more on the terrestrial side, and you can chip in on the marine side. But in terms of where on the terrestrial side, it's these last great strongholds for biodiversity. It's not the sort of degraded places on the outside. It's got to be these last great strongholds. And that, in a lot of places, is in intact forests. Intact forests on land contain 80% of terrestrial biodiversity, and so that's clearly a focus that we've got to go for. In addition, intact forests are really important in mitigating climate change. They absorb about 20% of all human produced carbon every year, and so keeping them in that intact state is really important as a tool. We're not going to reach the Paris goals without keeping our intact forests. And they're clearly also home to a large number of traditional and indigenous peoples around the world, fitting into what Steve said, that they're going to be the last guardians of these forests in many ways. And the other places on land which are really critically important to these areas with very high biomass of animals, of wildlife, which tend to be the big natural grasslands, which have been lost even more than forests have. And so those are the places of the last great migrations and the last great also human pastoralists in those areas. So if we can focus on those, and I'm sure you can say where we should be focusing on in the sea.
That's another panel. No, that's great. And so, we know that forests, especially tropical forests, harbor most of the biodiversity, most of the species on the planet, right? Because biodiversity, there is no place that is better for biodiversity than others. Biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. It's just represented in different trends and patterns, right? A place with 1,000 species per hectare in a tropical forest is as valuable as a place with only 10 species in the Arctic. It's just different manifestations of life. But, before going to that place in Angola, Steve, before the 60 research papers, there was not much information there, right? Actually, that was like a black hole in the knowledge of biodiversity in Africa. So why did you decide to go there? How did you prioritize without having that information?
I had to grow personally first, and that had a lot to do with National Geographic. From about 2001 through until 2015, 14, my entire world was just this Okavango Delta, 20,000 square kilometers in northern Botswana, this incredible wilderness. And I would explore it on my Makoro, cross it every 340 kilometers, about 200 miles, take us 18 days, and have these incredible experiences documenting its biodiversity. And then I came here. I became an emerging explorer in 2013, and I didn't really realize what was going on then. I was so overawed by it. But then in 14, I got to know Enric and many other explorers, and I suddenly broke out of the Okavango Delta. My brain opened. And I came back middle of the year, June, from the symposium, the festival. And within a few months, team members were up in Angola. We were making contact with governors. I followed them a month later. And 4 or 5 months later, we were in armored vehicles driving to the source of the Quito that had not been documented. All the information that we had, we saw these lakes, these wetlands. They were said to be wetlands filled with rainwater seasonally. We get there, we find these ancient acidic source lakes surrounded by these peatlands. The government, I sat with this governor, a very powerful man, third most powerful man in the country, in his palace, in Manong, the capital of that province. And I explained over 45 minutes with my translator exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to explore these rivers. I'm going to look for new species. I'm going to do all these things. And he stops me. He's a big man with a kind of ivory cane. And he says, stop. I have one big problem with this project. I was like, oh. He said, you, National Geographic, I wanted you in 2002 to come to Angola and see the new Angola. You are welcome. I will give you anything you need. And it was this unique opening. I was talking to Carter Roberts from WWF, and that's what he called it. These are one of these unique openings that we have to grasp onto and come in. We're talking about a landscape that is the size of the state of Wisconsin. We're talking about the primary water supply for the Okavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, the largest such conservation area in the world, home to more than half of the elephants remaining on the planet. It's an incredibly important landscape. But I'm the kind of person that is so focused on what I'm doing, my brain starts to open up on these expeditions. It was one of our photographers. He asked me, Steve, we're sitting on the Quito River. What is to the east of us? I said, it's just 400 kilometers of wilderness. And he said to me, well, why don't you try and protect it or help this government protect it? And again, ding, it happened. And I started to try and think about that, and that's been our mission for the rest of this time, culminating in signing this protocol of cooperation on the 4th of December, 2018. It's a 5-year agreement with the Angolan government. We're going to work with those communities to build a system of parks up there to protect this landscape.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. And I hope that there is the thing going on in the mind of many young explorers now. And I'll talk a little bit about the ocean, okay. So the last 10 years with the project Pristine Seas, we have been going to the wildest places in the ocean, places where we still, you jump in the water and you are immediately surrounded by sharks. Right? And this is something that made the Chinese laugh last week. They said, oh, you like sharks? I say, well, the different way that you like them. And so we have been working with partners and governments using this combination of exploration, research, and media to inspire governments around the world to create 21 of the largest marine reserves, covering an area of over 5 million square kilometers, half the size of Canada. And I'd like to thank our friend John Podesta, who's here today, because when in his latest years at the White House, he was instrumental in expanding our national marine monuments in the Pacific. So thank you, John. And we will continue working not only on the ocean, but also on these new last wild places to try to help to protect some of these key areas on the land that contain such important biodiversity. And the last question is, how much is it going to cost? So you have the Minister of the Environment, after we have convinced the Minister of the Environment or the President of the country, oh, we have to protect this, right? You have the emotional connection with the media. Ah, wonderful, yeah, I'm going to protect it. And here's all the science, 60 papers. You are not going to read them, but believe me, they are great. And then the Minister of Finance says, okay, how much is it going to cost? And this is where we have the problem. How much does it cost to manage a protected area?
It depends how remote it is. It depends on the pressures on it. Because broadly, as I heard Mr. Wyss saying in the previous section, we've got to maintain them, not just establish them. Because otherwise, it's like leaving with all these species that people value for all the wrong reasons inside them. It's like leaving a bank without a guard. So there's one that I can just give you one example of, is Nuabali-Ndoki National Park in northern Congo. It's a fabulous national park. It was one of the parks founded as a result of Mike Fay's walk that we heard about earlier. And it's about 4,000 square kilometers. It's under very heavy poaching pressure because it's got one of the best last remaining populations of African forest elephants in it, as well as gorillas and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that costs about $750 per square kilometer per year to protect, to do all the correct patrols and all that sort of stuff.
So we're talking about millions of dollars potentially for large protected areas, yep. Right? And this is the problem. The Minister of Finance only hears, oh, we're going to forego all these quick dollars for timber, right? Plus every year is going to cost us $500,000, $1 million, whatever it is, right? So we don't have the money, right? That's the problem. But what these people don't communicate and the Ministers of Finance don't know is that protected areas produce enormous benefits. And $750 per square kilometer. In the US, every dollar that the US government invests in the management of a national park produces a return of $10. 10-fold return that fits into the local economy. It's like, you don't open a restaurant and expect to have a net profit on day one, right? Same thing with protected areas. They provide huge benefits, but we need to give them time. And not only economic benefits. In Cabo Pulmo, that place in Baja California, those visionary fishermen are now much better off because they live off tourism. And the fishermen around that park are also catching more fish, and their incomes are higher. And yesterday, there was a new scientific paper coming out saying that marine protected areas that are fully protected provide well-being benefits to humans. Same thing for the land. In protected areas in developing countries, kids are more likely to be in good health. and to be higher for the same age, taller for the same age, and do better at school. So protected areas have benefits that extend well beyond the boundaries. And you mentioned Greg Carr before, Tracy. Greg Carr is this wonderful conservationist who has been involved in the restoration of the Gorongosa National Park in Africa. And he told us that during the last Cyclone Idai, that killed a couple of thousand people in Mozambique a few months ago, the natural grasslands of the park absorbed an amount of rain equivalent to 800,000 Olympic swimming pools. The degraded grasslands, where the livestock has overgrazed the grasslands, it is like asphalt. The water falls and it just goes downstream. You have these floods. So the park actually prevented greater floods and loss of life. So there are all these benefits that come with protected areas. And so what benefits would you expect for Angola if those protected areas are created at the mouth of the rivers?
Well, they get their history back. I mean, the big elephant you see standing in the main rotunda at the Smithsonian here in DC is the Fenicovey elephant. Now, that elephant was shot by Joseph Fenicovey in 1955 in the part of Angola we're working in. This is recognized as the largest ever land animal ever seen and then shot. Now, that part of Angola was known as the living room of Africa. In 1961, when the elephant was unveiled at the museum, National Geographic in the September issue wrote an article, Angola, Unknown Africa, romanticizing the cultures, the landscapes, the Fenicovey elephant, safari. This was way before we even knew about Botswana or Namibia or Zambia, these established industries now. Angola was going to have that. But then in 1961, the Civil War, the War of Independence breaks out. Now, war in that country continues till 2002. They got independence in 75, and then the Civil War broke out. So these 40 years were stolen from them. Now, many of you know Walter Settler-Bosche from our film. He's one of the leaders in our project. You'll see him tonight. He's here somewhere, I think. Where are you, Walter? Yeah. Now, Walter, we've now made first contact with the communities up there, these Luchazi communities along the Nhangu River. And we go and visit, and we look at their lives and the way they're living. And Walter says to me, he says, well, you know, my life before the Maremi Game Reserve in the Okavango Delta was very similar to theirs. We were hunting, farming, fishing. We had similar homes. My dad had sandals like that. We made fishing traps, very similar. That was our life. But he saw his life change with the Maremi Game Reserve being established. He became a hunter for a while. He left that to become a safari guide for 14 years. He now has an iPhone, a Land Cruiser. His kids are going to school. He has an incredible family life. And he said that was stolen from these Angolan people. He felt kinship with them. And he said, Steve, we have to help them catch up these 40 years they've lost. So that's what they get back.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. Okay, how many people now is ready to come up here and give a talk about 30 by 30? Oh man, nobody now. Uh-oh. Great. Hansjörg, thank you so much for your extraordinary commitment and leadership. And we are with you on this campaign to help to protect as much of our planet as possible. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Coming up now. Wow. Now that's a tough job, conserving 30% of the planet by 2030. But we have reason for hope. We have people like this working hard in the field, working to conserve our planet. Now, many of our own human nature, what we do affects the planet in very harmful ways. And that's one of the things that we need to really think about, changing our everyday manners in order to lessen our impact on the natural world. So National Geographic is deeply committed to researching solutions to prevent plastic from entering the oceans. So last year, National Geographic launched Planet or Plastic, a global multi-year initiative to raise awareness and help try to solve the devastating impacts of single-use plastic. And right now, my team is in India helping with the National Geographic team, and we're going to get on a Skype call with Heather, and she's going to tell us more about the project that they're working on to stop the flow of plastic into the ocean. So here to tell us more about our all-female expedition team working to track plastic from sea to source in India, marine biologist and National Geographic fellow, Heather Koldewey.
We just want to show a short video that highlights the plastic pollution problem.
Around the world, nearly 1 million plastic water bottles are sold every minute. Millions of tons of plastic waste enters our ocean every year. Plastic can take lifetimes to decompose, leaving our planet drowning in waste.
Our planet is in trouble. We're reaching a crisis point when it comes to plastic pollution. But it's also solvable.
That's why we at National Geographic are asking our global community of changemakers to join us in choosing planet or plastic. From the pages of our magazine to the work of our scientists and explorers, we are using our voice to connect with millions and drive change. We've launched a global, multi-year initiative to reduce plastic waste in our ocean. We're supporting research to answer key questions.
We're tracking this plastic from source to sea.
And fund innovative solutions.
All the exterior facade is made from 100% recycled plastic bottles.
We're empowering the next generation of leaders by supporting educators and engaging students.
Whatever lesson that I'm teaching, I try to make connections to the real world, to the environment, and to their personal lives.
It's not something that's a next generation problem. It's a problem that we need to solve now.
It starts with people caring, and when you care, then you make a difference.
We hope you'll join us and help turn the tide on plastic waste.
We are the ones that can do something about it.
I'm really excited to see how we can solve this massive plastic problem.
Learn more at natgeo.org/plastic.
One month ago, I found myself with my team on this small blue boat. We were fighting waves that were crashing over us. A ridiculous current was swirling us around, and we were gently baking in 40 degrees C, 100 degrees Fahrenheit in old money, heat. But this isn't some ocean survival story. This is us at the start of the National Geographic Sea to Source expedition, going to our first site in the River Ganges to collect water samples from the middle of the river that at that point just happens to be 7 miles wide. The river movement is insane. We were on a proper adventure. This river is immense. It's one of the most iconic rivers on the planet, culturally, economically, and incredibly important from a biodiversity perspective, stretching 1,600 miles from the Bay of Bengal right up to the source in the Himalayas. And our job as Sea to Source expedition team was to work out how to track plastic from source to sea, to work out where it was coming from, and more importantly, how to solve the plastic pollution problem. So why rivers? We know from data that are based on models that rivers are one of the important contributors of plastic pollution to the ocean. And in those top 3 rivers, the Ganges is one of them. But these data are based on models just looking at population and waste management systems. So we were the first team ever to look at how we could go globally to develop a methodology and a comprehensive assessment system to work out how to look at plastic and how this is changing. But first, let me take you to the team. As a start point, we are the largest all-women team that National Geographic has put together. We actually started to call this the expedition of firsts. Firstly, because I'm job sharing expedition leadership with Jenna Jambeck, professor at the University of Georgia, because we want to show not only can women succeed in science and conservation, but you can still be a mother and do so. So we're changing the parameter of exploration to mean that we can really achieve, we can demonstrate that it's possible not to choose between a family and career, but to deliver both at the same time. Thank you. We also didn't start off explicitly saying this would be all women. We set off choosing the best people for the job, and they just happen to be women. And you'll see here that as we thought about it, we of course brought on our in-country partners working with the University of Dhaka, Wild Team, and the Isabella Foundation in Bangladesh, and the Wildlife Institute of India, that we felt there was a massive opportunity to show the capability and strength and build opportunities for women in science, technology, engineering, and maths, and bring them on board to really create a united goal of making a difference and delivering this expedition together. So back to being on the boat. Around this methodology, you're traveling an enormous river system, you're spending 3 to 4 days at each site, and you're really trying to understand everything that's going on. So to do this, our team is very diverse. We're biologists, we're ecologists, we're engineers, we're technology experts, we're anthropologists, we're social scientists, and we're storytellers. And we are pulling together all of these methodologies at each site to make a difference. So on the water, it's measuring microplastics in sediment and in water. We're looking at collecting plastic particles from the air to understand where plastic is in air pollution. We're doing a threat assessment of plastics on wildlife in the river, particularly fish, which are so important for communities to eat. And then the fourth dimension of our work is to look at the people component. Firstly, how do they generate waste? The University of Georgia team have developed a citizen science tool to measure plastic waste, marine debris tracker. Anybody can use that. And we're applying it to actually systematically document the waste that we see in these different systems. We've also taken methodologies, transects and quadrats, photoquadrats from coral reef science, and applied them to map and document and quantify complex systems of waste. And then we're experimenting in that important transition between land and water. So we've created these eco-plywood drift cards that we're working as a community engagement tool to deploy in likely routes for plastic to go through storm drains, through side channels, into the main river and down into the ocean. These have a message on them asking people to communicate by SMS or WhatsApp when they find one. And we're going to go back after the monsoon and see how these have moved through the system. At the other end of the spectrum from pieces of wood, we have really pioneering technology, satellite tracking mock-up plastic bottles using satellites and cellular to see how they move through the system. And we're drone mapping the transition between the riverbank and the river. But finally, it's about the people. We have an amazing socioeconomic team who are working with communities. At each site, we talk to focus groups, women, waste pickers, fishers, youth, and decision makers. And we do household surveys. We know that the informal waste sector is a critical part of the solution, but often ignored, and that we have to create inclusive solutions if we are to make a difference. This, for me, is science with purpose. It's exploration that matters. For us, it's not a choice. It's all about planet and not plastic. But it's still an expedition underway. I rejoin it on Friday. But now I'd like to take you to my colleagues live in India, in the field, who are delivering this expedition right now on the ground. Sorry? Oh, you don't have it?
We don't have it.
Okay.
So sorry.
Is there any...
That's not happening.
Okay. I understand there's no audio. Aren't they fabulous? So this has been an intense effort to show some of the challenges of delivering science and conservation in remote areas, and that's around the technology involved in communicating what we're trying to do. So these guys have just come in from the field today. It is actually a festival.
the Ganges, celebrating the birth of Iganga. We've delivered a community cleanup, and we've been out, with a team have been out doing their scientific methodologies all day. So this is what they look like. They are all amazing, honestly. And this is this awesome team. Jenna's right there in the middle, at the back, waving. There we go. And she can't even hear me. This is how well we work together. And wrap it up. So I'm really sorry that they had done an awesome film. They've been working all night to try and do this live feed and live communications. But as ever, to prove that it's live, it doesn't work. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Heather. And I completely understand technological problems being based in India. It's amazing we got that much. Yeah. So there's a lot of problems out there in the field. And so we've spent this morning with some critical threats facing our planet. And our next segment focuses on how we define reality and inspire hope to move towards solutions. Storytellers and educators are some of the best at helping us define the realities we live in. So I am especially happy to introduce you to two speakers, a storyteller and an educator. Pete Mueller is a photographer, multimedia reporter, and National Geographic Fellow. And Mapp is the CEO of Outdoor Afro and also a National Geographic Fellow. Welcome, Pete.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start this morning by asking you just to close your eyes, please. And when you do this, I'd like you to envision the place that you call home, wherever that may be. And I don't necessarily mean the house that you live in, but a place that gives you a sense of comfort and grounding and connection. And I'd just like you to try to be there just for a moment. And I'd like you to imagine that a transformation happens in this environment that starts to change the characteristics of this place that you've known and loved, that's given you the sense of comfort, such that you don't quite recognize it. It doesn't feel familiar to you any longer. Now, depending on what causes this transformation, this feeling might be difficult to articulate and express. It's complicated. You can open your eyes. I'd like you to take you to a place this morning where that's not an imagined situation, it's becoming a form of reality. This is the Upper Hunter Valley. It's this beautiful, idyllic river valley about 3 hours north of the city of Sydney in Australia. And for most of its history, it's been known for beautiful things: thoroughbred horse breeding, dairy farms, wine vineyards. But in the late 1990s, there was a discovery of high-quality coal underneath the valley floor. Big companies came in and started digging big holes to get at it. Holes like this. This is the Mount Thorley Warkworth mine in Singleton Shire. It's a massive, massive hole. It's visible from space. They started opening mines like this all throughout the Upper Hunter. And with it came this sort of associated, transformative physical attributes. All in this quiet place. This is Glenn Albrecht. He's an environmental philosopher. And at the time, Glenn became interested in the emotional dimensions of what was happening to communities that were living around these mines. And as the mines expanded, the word of Glenn's interest in them and that experience started to spread, and his phone started to ring. And on the other end of the phone were people like Wendy Bowman. Wendy'd lived most of her adult life in the valley. She's been involved with a dairy farming family, and she was beside herself. She was fighting with mining companies that were trying to acquire parts of her property. She was serving as an informal counselor for all these other people who were going through a similar experience. She couldn't sleep at night. She was carrying this sense of emotional weight day and night. Glenn got calls from people like John Lamb. He was a tough guy. He was a former soldier. He thought issues of mental health and emotional well-being were for the weak, that he was in control of his experience through the energy of his mind. But as these holes got bigger, something in John broke. No matter how hard he tried to keep his energies up, as soon as he'd confront these mines, his heart would just drop into his feet. He started driving 20, 30, 40 kilometers out of his way to avoid these confrontations. Glenn started to get a lot of these kinds of stories, and he started to notice this commonality among them. People knew that the mines were the source of their distress, but they had a very difficult time articulating this feeling. It was almost like a sense of homesickness. But nobody left home. It was almost like their homes had, or some essence of their homes had left them. And it wasn't really nostalgia either, because it wasn't purely looking back at golden days gone by. This was about something being lost or something kind of being taken in the present, and that had implications for the future also. As far as Glenn could tell, there was no word to describe this experience. And without one, people in the valley couldn't explain how they were feeling to other people, and they couldn't really even make sense of it to themselves. So Glenn sat down with his wife and his intellectual partner, Jill, and they decided to name it. Enough of this. People are experiencing it. They can't express it. We have to name it. So they started thinking about what exactly was underway. What was this feeling that people were having? Well, there was a pain, a sort of longing, an algia, like nostalgia, the pain to return. And this pain related to people's homes. And what are our homes, really? They give us a sense of comfort. So Glenn was thinking, okay, comfort, but how can I modify that word into a new word to describe this? Well, they got out this book of synonyms and antonyms that Jill had from her school days. And they looked up the word comfort in there. And there they found a synonym, solace, to have a sense of peace. And Glenn thought, I think that might work. So in a paper in 2003, Glenn started to call this complex emotional experience of losing this sense of place, he started to call this solastalgia. And it's since become known as this idea of an existential or psychic sense of distress that's brought about by unwelcomed or negative changes in a person's home environment. People started talking about this. They started making art about it, writing poetry, having conferences. And I heard it years later in a film, a National Geographic documentary film, in my mother's living room, tens of thousands of miles away from where it originated. And I thought, wow, what an interesting idea. This was a new frontier in sort of examining and charting our experience in this changing world. And it wasn't just about the physical changes outside of us. It was about how those changes were being mirrored back within us. But if we lack words and terminology and concepts to understand and identify those things and share them, perhaps we're not seeing them for the prevalence at which they're occurring. And maybe that is part of the problem. So I started to travel with this idea in mind. I went to Paradise, California, where the campfire decimated that town last November. I spent time with people like Gwen Norgren. We see her sitting by the pool of her former home. She used to come out through these double doors, cut across the walkway, dive into the pool, float on her back, and look at this beautiful blue California sky. I spent time with Don Criswell, sixth-generation Paradisian, deeply devoted to the town, deeply imbued with its sense of place. Don plays the piano. He played all over town, the bars, restaurants, lodges. He used to play at the Rocky Mountain Smokehouse here. You can see that on the left. Don and I talked a lot about what it was like to lose that place, what that stress and experience was like, what community meant, what rebuilding was going to mean. Traveled high up into the Andes Mountains in Peru with members of towards the Coyoriti Festival, which is the Snow Star Festival, with members of the Quechua community. This is an annual pilgrimage that occurs to worship the Lord of the Ice, the Lord of Coyoriti, which resides in a series of glaciers that are melting at a rapid pace. Here we see Pablitos at the base of the glaciers before the ceremony at dawn. Talked about the emotional role and the spiritual dimensions of seeing these changes. Traveled to the far edge of the Russian Arctic, where coastal members of the Chukchi community are deeply reliant on a healthy marine ecosystem around them, both for sustenance, like we see here, the hunting of marine mammals like walruses, but also for a strong sense of identity. Those communities are noticing an inconsistent formation of sea ice these days, which has dire implications for the ecosystem, the health of the breeding grounds and resting grounds for Pacific walruses. And I spent time at the coast of Louisiana, on Isle de Jean Charles. It's a small island, gets smaller each year. It's a place where coastal erosion and rising sea levels have conspired to take nearly 90% of this island over the last 50 years. And there I met Chantal Commerdale. We see Chantal sitting with her father, Boyo, and her son in this picture. This is 4 generations of her family, a 5th represented in the pictures on the wall. Chantal's 37, and she shared with me some really interesting observations about the sense of and the shape and contours of this loss and what it's meant to her. And I'd like to let her speak for herself here. Oops.
Going through this process, we've met other communities, and there's a community in Alaska who's had the same thing. And we were able to sit down and talk about things, and it was almost exactly the same feelings, the same emotion that they went through. It was an instant, it was like, oh, okay, so I'm not alone. This isn't just something I'm making up in my mind, you know. It was real. It became real.
It became real. And it became real in part because Chantal knew that other people were feeling it too, that she wasn't alone. We are social animals. We have a deep need to understand ourselves and others around us and connect over these things. And language is an important part of that. Chantal was able to close the physical distance between herself and that community in Newtok, Alaska. But where that's not possible, words can build some of these bridges. And without them, perhaps we are arguably blind to the prevalence of these experiences and the possibilities of solutions to solve them. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Narrative matters. Good morning. My name is Rue Mapp, founder and CEO of Outdoor Afro. And yes, narrative matters. Thanks, Pete. I didn't see people who looked like me represented in natural spaces as I was growing up, in the same way that my family was enjoying the outdoors. My parents came from Texas and Louisiana in search of the warmth of other suns to California, leaving behind Jim Crow, but bringing with them a love of nature, and importantly, the desire and imperative to connect in nature with others. So while we lived most of the time in Oakland, California, we had this beautiful ranch about 100 miles north in Lake County, in this beautiful savanna of oak rolling woodlands. And it was truly my laboratory, but it was also a place where we brought family together, just as you see depicted in this picture, for all kinds of celebrations. But I can remember how excited I was to jump out of the car when we arrived at the ranch and head to our local creek to find out what was new. Had the tadpole turned into a frog? Were the rushing rivers trickling down in the heat of summer? And back at the ranch, I noticed what was in bloom, what was ready to be picked and eaten and perhaps canned. And I had a very rich connection to environmental education through the Girl Scouts. And these are 2 pages from my diary, where I write in big, loopy cursive how much I loved the Girl Scouts and how much I loved camping. But everything came together for me several years later. I was an outward bound student, and I thought I could do mountaineering. Since I had this long connection to the outdoors, why not try it? But I found myself starfished on the side of this mountain in Sequoia Kings. And I was about to give up when my instructor,
who did not give up on me, and neither did that mountain. My instructor leaned over and said the magic words, "Rue, trust your feet." And there was something magical about those words that empowered me to scramble up to the top. And that was the moment that I understood nature as a powerful teacher, there to teach me exactly the lesson I needed to learn. At the precipice of adulthood, I needed to know that I had what I needed already inside of me to move forward. Even if I didn't know what was ahead of me or what just happened, that I could continue to move forward, and I'm still trusting my feet. So things came together for me several years later. I wanted to do something different professionally, and I had a mentor ask me the question that I think everyone should ask or answer. And that is, if time and money were not an issue, what would you be doing? And I opened my mouth and my life fell out. I said, I'd probably start a website to reconnect African Americans to the outdoors. And Outdoor Afro was born, and it was born at my kitchen table. And I just began to tell the story of growing up wild and how I was connecting my own children, my own 3 children, to wild places, and the value that it provided for me. But not only was a blog born, a community of leadership was born. And I'm so proud that using social media, I was able to connect with people who had a narrative very similar to my own and wanted to do something about it. And over the years, we learned from each other and we grew with each other. And I'm so proud by the ways that we have together shift the visual representation of who gets outside, but importantly, who leads in the outdoors. Thank you. And these are ordinary, everyday men and women. I call them the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They come from a wide tapestry of professional backgrounds, but they share this fire in their belly to connect others to nature. And we now oversee a participation network spanning 30 states of over 36,000 people. And in a proud moment last year, a group of those leaders summited Mount Kilimanjaro. Again, teaching us that we can find a way to understand life through life's climbs. We're also taking a step back often in our work and remembering our very important history and the ways that we have persisted and overcame in nature, even when nature was hostile to us. We can turn to the plaintive lyrics of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit to understand that in the not-so-distant past, the outdoors, the wilderness, and trees did not always represent safety for Black people. But we have a new testimony. We have a way today to tell a new narrative through this work. And we have the ability to, just like our foremothers did, lay down our burdens down by that riverside. Outdoor Afro has decided this year that we are going to teach every child in our sphere of influence to learn to swim. Why? Because of Jim Crow, because of decades of exclusion from public pools, from beaches and coastal areas, we have a public health crisis where African American children are drowning at 5 times the rate of their white counterparts. And because we've built this trust and this network, it's time for us to convert that into action. And we know that if a child doesn't know how to swim, they're not gonna put a pole in a lazy lake. They're not going to take a ride in a canoe. And they're certainly not gonna care about plastic in the ocean. So we're very thankful for all the ways that we can turn to nature for healing and community, just as my parents did. And take the time to get to know our species that surround us and our relationship with them. And this picture here really touches me. This is a picture of Barbara and her daughter through Outdoor Afro experiencing snow for the very first time. People often ask me, what will it look like when your work is done, Rue, when our work is done? I don't think it's going to be a Main Street parade with tickers falling from the sky. It may not appear on the cover of a national magazine. I think it's going to be this quiet moment when we all look up and we see people outside recreating, protecting, healing in nature in proportion to their population and their opportunity. And it's no big deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rue. Okay, so I know we've had a long morning, but we've got a lot more to cover. It's time for a super short break. So if you can, we're already running behind time. So if you could go out, stretch your legs, and come back as quickly as possible, we'll get the show started again. Thank you all.
This year is a changing of the guard. It's been insane out here.
Okay, ready? Yeah!
It's like a crispy cockroach.
This is my job to try to make it fun.
Please welcome Senior Vice President of Global Engagement for the National Geographic Society, Emma Carrasco.
Wow, what a morning, huh? And we are just getting started. You know, this year, National Geographic turned 131 years old. And people often ask us, how is it that the brand, the organization remains relevant? How do you continue to resonate with generations of families and communities? And we think that the answer lies in our commitment to our heritage, to continue to pursue exploration and discovery, to push the limits of innovation, and to support the kind of limitless human ingenuity and spirit that is in every explorer that's in this room and around the world. These qualities happen to be very true for our longtime partner, ROLEX. ROLEX has been supporting exploration since the 1930s. And some of those earliest expeditions to the extremes of the Earth actually served as testing grounds for many of their timepieces. And so it's no wonder that we have been together for 65 years. It's a remarkable partnership. And we expanded it in 2017 with the goal of creating even more impact, bringing new science to the world, all in the pursuit of creating a perpetual planet. And so today, in the spirit of that partnership, for the first time, we are welcoming to the National Geographic stage the finalists of the ROLEX Awards for Enterprise. This is a remarkable group of people. They are our kind of people. These are champions of big ideas and big challenges that will change the world. So here to tell us more about the ROLEX Awards for Enterprise is the head of ROLEX's considerable philanthropic efforts, Rebecca Irvin. Rebecca?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you to National Geographic for allowing us to present to you the ROLEX Awards for Enterprise and the 2019 finalists. We're very excited to be here to do this for the first time. Emma mentioned the ROLEX's long association with explorers, so that we tested our watches in extreme conditions. And ROLEX was also responsible for quite a lot of innovations in watchmaking, and probably one of the most important was in 1926, the invention of the ROLEX Oyster, which was the world's first waterproof watch. And as you can imagine, that was extremely important for underwater exploration for many explorers. And it was in 1976, which is the 50th anniversary of that invention, that ROLEX created the ROLEX Awards for Enterprise, so more than 40 years ago. And these awards demonstrate the company's commitment to make a positive contribution to society and the wider world. So these are some of the oldest and most prestigious corporate awards in existence. The ROLEX Awards are given to individual men and women not to organizations. They're based on the belief that major changes in society and have been brought about throughout history by the efforts of individuals and this incredible passion and vision that one person can have a positive impact on society. So interestingly, these are not achievement awards. They are given for new or ongoing projects that advance knowledge of the world, improve human well-being, and protect our natural and cultural heritage. And that, as you see, is a perfect alignment also with the mission of National Geographic. So the 140 men and women have been selected so far as ROLEX laureates, represent 190 countries. They have been explorers, conservationists, social entrepreneurs, doctors, engineers, scientists. Many of them are a part of the National Geographic community, and many of them are also here today. All these people have the courage and conviction to take on major challenges and make the world a better place. And this is the case of the 10 finalists of the 2019 ROLEX Awards who will shortly present their projects on stage. And we're so excited to be here. And we also, you'll notice in your National Geographic Festival app, there is a survey section, and you will be able to vote for your favorite projects, and your vote will help our jury select the 5 laureates who will be announced on Friday. And so we hope you'll be inspired by these presentations. So I'll pass the floor to Francesco Raeli, who is my colleague and who heads up the ROLEX Awards, and he'll introduce each finalist. Thank you.
Our first finalist is British marine biologist Emma Camp, with her projects to foster coral resilience to save the Great Barrier Reef. Please welcome Emma.
The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is the largest living structure on Earth. It's home to over 7,000 marine species, has huge economic and cultural value, and supports essential ecosystem services such as fisheries. This underwater city, full of life and colour, however, is turning white and derelict. Climate change is compromising not only the Great Barrier Reef, but reefs globally. Warmer, more acidic and low oxygen seawater is negatively affecting the fundamental biology of corals. And this is compromising whether they will be able to persist into the future. In just 3 years, over 1/3 of the entire Great Barrier Reef has been lost. And we really risk that actually within our lifetime, the whole reef as we know it will cease to exist. Now, while we must urgently reduce carbon emissions, time is running out for coral reefs. But one way we can aid corals to survive into the future is to identify corals that are naturally resilient to the stresses that we're predicting to see intensify under climate change. So warmer, more acidic and low oxygen seawaters. And then use these corals to help reseed the devastation that we as humans are causing to the reefs globally. Through my work, I pioneered the observation that corals persisting in mangrove lagoons have warmer, more acidic and low oxygen seawaters than the adjacent reefs, and that these corals are surviving in really hostile conditions, more extreme than we're predicting to see for 200 years on the reef. How are they surviving there? With my team, we've discovered over 10 sites globally where these coral diverse populations are thriving in conditions where they really shouldn't be. But we amazingly know nothing about how these corals are surviving on the Great Barrier Reef, the largest reef on Earth. With the help of the ROLEX Awards, I'm hoping to undertake 2 large expeditions to the northern Great Barrier Reef to understand which corals are there, how are they surviving there, and then can we use some of these corals to transplant to adjacent areas that have been devastated and reseed these reef areas to try to reverse some of the degradation that has been caused by our impacts. And ultimately then, can we identify unique optical signatures of these locations so we can identify a network of hotspots of resilience globally that is ultimately needed to preserve this system into the future? All of these activities will be undertaken with citizen scientists and in particular local tour operators to ensure that everyone's engaged in the solution. The expeditions will be live linked to schools globally to ensure that the future scientists and conservationists and leaders understand the value of coral reefs and to ensure that ultimately all of us can work together to ensure that there are coral reefs into the future and that they have the ecosystem services that we all need. Thank you.
Our next finalist is Brian Gitta, an IT specialist from Uganda, who is developing a non-invasive device to diagnose malaria rapidly. Please welcome Brian.
Every year, tens of millions of people in Africa get infected with malaria. Even in our company, every member of the team has had it. Because we have all had different episodes of malaria, we know how firsthand it is difficult to diagnose. Even in an equipped clinic, it takes up to 30 minutes from the time a blood sample is acquired till when conclusive results can be obtained with a microscope. And equipped clinics with experienced health professionals do not exist in many poor regions of Africa. In most cases, death by malaria is because of late diagnosis. More than 4 years ago, we set out to find a better way, and we did. We have developed a non-invasive diagnostic test with this device, where a patient inserts a clean finger into that device, and in a couple of minutes, they get a result. Here is how the technology works. When a person gets infected with malaria, it means that the Plasmodium parasite lives within your blood cells. While there, it sheds feces into your bloodstream. These feces contain a type of crystal that is magnetic because it contains an iron atom. Our device uses magnets to detect whether you have these crystals in your bloodstream. And if you do, you are carrying the parasite. Additionally, the parasite affects the chemical and physical composition of the red blood cell. So using the principles of light scattering, we can shine a light beam onto the patient's finger and detect whether these changes are made to identify if these cells are destroyed. The device is currently undergoing clinical trials in Uganda. It has an efficacy of 80%. This is not enough. We need to get to at least an efficiency of 90%. And this is what we shall be working on with the support from ROLEX, in addition to improving the safety and effectiveness of the device. Finally, the device incorporates machine learning. The identified cases can be uploaded onto a dashboard to produce aggregated data that can show in almost real time the geographical distribution and evolution of the cases. Let me close by sharing a story that shows the question is not only technological, but also cultural. Our device does not need blood for diagnosis, but during our early tests, we realized that people do not yet trust a device that doesn't need a blood sample. So we had to create a possibility to insert into that device, instead of a finger, a cuvette with a drop of blood. Thank you very much.
Let us now travel to Brazil with fisheries biologist João Campos-Silva, who has a project to manage sustainably arapaima fish population and help communities in the Amazon. Please welcome João.
Hello, guys. I'm so glad to share with you a very beautiful history from Brazil, which can help us to build optimism and hope, especially for the Amazonia. This is the giant arapaima, the largest freshwater scaled fish on Earth, reaching up to 3 meters and more than 200 kilos. And you can find it in the waters of Amazonia. Actually, I should say, you can still find it, because over the last century, it has become almost extinct due to overfishing. More recently, however, community-based management have been inducing a huge recovery in wild population, which increased more than 400% in the last 10 years. The mechanism behind the population recovery is simple. We build fishing agreements, and local communities are empowered to protect its territory, banning completely commercial fishing and poaching. The fast reproduction combined with the migratory behavior of the arapaima allows the replenishment of the entire landscape. Finally, local communities are allowed to harvest a small quota of these individuals. Many other overexploited species are also recovering in protected lakes, including manatees, giant otters, freshwater turtles, and caimans. Beyond the biodiversity conservation, I believe that around Arapaima, we can engineer a social transformation in Amazonia to improve the quality of life of local communities. Protected Lakes has been working as a bank account, providing a huge amount of income every year, especially for women. Other social benefits include increasing in food security, access to health care, and infrastructure improvements such as schools and households. Now, it's time to expand this model across 2,000 kilometers of a major Amazonian river. We will ensure the protection of hundreds of lakes, benefiting thousands of people. We will also provide training for fishers, environmental education for youth and teachers, and we will empower women to play a central role in fishery management. Brazilian Amazon has more than 6 million people coexisting with the richest biodiversity and aspiring for a better life. When I started to work with Arapaima, I could see in their eyes hope for a better life. There's no option. If we want to achieve a sustainable future for Amazonia, we need to put together biodiversity conservation and well-being of local communities. We can do it now, starting from a giant, the lovely Arapaima. Thank you very much.
Our next finalist is French neuroscientist Grégoire Courtine with her project to reverse paralysis due to spinal cord injury. Please welcome Grégoire.
This is David. 9 years ago, a gymnastic accident contused his spinal cord. And now, when his brain sends a signal to move his leg, the signal is interrupted, leaving him paralyzed. In the laboratory I lead at the Swiss Institute of Technology, my team and I developed a treatment that enabled David and 5 other previously paralyzed patients to walk again. What's the principle? We implanted a pacemaker to activate the executive center located in the spinal cord below the injury. The pacemaker aims to activate the spinal cord as the brain would do naturally in order to walk. But timing is crucial. The pacemaker must be controlled with the precision of a ROLEX chronometer in order to synchronize the stimulation with the intended movement. This is David at the beginning of his training with the implant. Stimulation on means it's turned on. When it's turned off, he can't walk. Back on, he immediately continues to walk. The pacemaker enables him to train intensively, which promotes the growth of new nerve connections. And after 6 months of such training, David can talk to his connected watch to trigger the stimulation.
Stim on.
Okay, start message sent to implant.
And walk freely in our beautiful Swiss landscape. Thank you. However, there is one problem. David cannot control the stimulation on his own. Therefore, cannot decide whether to stand or to walk or pass an obstacle. So my intention, if I secure the ROLEX award, is to connect David's brain directly with the pacemaker. For this purpose, we will additionally implant a minimally invasive wireless system to record the activity of David's brain. And we will enable him to control the stimulation with his thoughts. I know what you are thinking. This seems out of a sci-fi movie. But trust me, we have fully validated this digital bridge in preclinical model. And now, my dream is to enable not only David, but also millions of paralyzed people across the world to enjoy an everyday life like you and me. And you know what? This still seems to be a dream. 15 years of research in my laboratory have brought that dream one step closer to reality. The steps already taken by David and 5 other patients who were told they would never walk again. So I will not stop until we complete the journey. Thank you for your support.
We will now hear a conservation scientist from India, Krithi Karanth, who is working to reduce the friction between wildlife and human populations. Please welcome Krithi.
I'm home. India is a melting pot for people and wildlife. We share lions and leopards with Africa. We share wolves and bears with North America and Europe. And we share tigers and rhinos with the rest of Asia. What sets us apart is that we have less than 5% of land for wildlife, 1 billion people, and high human-wildlife conflict. What is conflict? It's somebody losing their crops, it's somebody having their house destroyed, and in retaliation, electrocuting elephants. Conflict is also having your livestock injured, your livestock killed, and in retaliation, poisoning tigers and leopards. My research over the last 10 years has taken me to 3,000 villages across India to understand conflict, to understand compensation, to understand mitigation. What we found is that India is the highest conflict country in the world. The government of India pays a compensation for 100,000 incidents of conflict per year, but less than 30% of people are filing claims. To fix that, 4 years ago, we launched Project Wild Save. It's a 1-800 toll-free number connected to a data portal. If you have a leopard on your roof or an elephant in your farm, you call us, we arrive at the scene, 98% of the time within the first 24 hours. Thanks to our efforts, we've assisted in filing 14,000 claims with the government. As an NGO, we don't pay the claims. We make sure that the government assists people. Thanks to our efforts, people have received $450,000 in compensation from the government. But I realized something. After 4 years of running this project, there were children in these villages who lived in fear of wildlife, who lived without the awe and wonder about tigers and elephants, and we had to change that. Last year, we launched Project Wild Save. We took it to 2,500 kids, 50 schools. It's a conservation education program for Indian kids using Indian wildlife. We use art, we use storytelling, we use science to make wildlife and wild places interesting and fun. This year, we've raised funding to go to 450 schools and 40,000 kids. I hope Wild Save and Wild Chalet will allow us never to see scenes like this again and allow kids to fall in love with nature like I did when I was 2 years old. I stand here before you because National Geographic gave me their 10,000th grant 10 years ago, and they've given me 5 more grants since then, allowing me to dream, try, integrate science, conservation, and education. Thank you.
Before we present the other 5 finalists to you, I wanted to say a word about the jury. So the ROLEX Awards winners are chosen by an independent interdisciplinary panel of experts. The jury changes for each series of the awards. It's also made up of scientists, explorers, medical specialists, educators, and innovators. And again, we've had a lot of synergies with National Geographic. Many National Geographic personalities have served on the ROLEX juries, including Gilbert Grosvenor, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Sylvia Earle, David Dubillet, and this year, Jonathan Baillie. So we want to show you a short film about the selection process and the 2019 jury.
Human potential is only limited by where we're willing to dream and where we're willing to put our resource. The ROLEX Award can be huge for moving a vision forward.
I feel very proud to be part of this very, very important jury. I'm profoundly moved by the inventions, the innovations, the energy and passion, and the sheer determination of these individuals.
We're looking for people that are going to inspire the next generation. There's a lot of hope and there's a lot of innovation
on the horizon.
You want to see people who are really engaged and that they've thought about all of the issues beyond just what the research is going to be, the sort of global and local impact.
You've got to have that drive. You've got to literally be at the point of addicted to what it is that you're trying to achieve.
We've got the joy of meeting extraordinary individuals. I do think every one of these individuals will have a significant impact. There's just no doubt.
So the 2019 jury members are here. I'd like them to just stand up and so that we can give them a round of applause. So they're going to have the difficult task of choosing the 5 laureates from these fantastic finalists. And they already met in London in February and chose the 10 extraordinary individuals that you're seeing now. So please help them. And by voting on the festival app, I should say that you can vote for 1, 2, 5, or 10 of these finalists, and we'll look at what you think the National Geographic Explorers Festival thinks of these projects and these individuals. So I'll have Francesco introduce the final 5. Thank you.
Our next finalist is Canadian molecular biologist and entrepreneur Miranda Wang, who is turning plastic waste into valuable chemical building blocks. Please welcome Miranda.
Plastics are miracle materials. That's why we're addicted to them. Today, plastics are so convenient and they add so much safety to our daily lives that it's by no accident that we're constantly expanding production for this material. The problem is plastics are non-biodegradable, and most of them end up in landfills and oceans. It's actually so much more expensive to make plastic from used plastic than it is to make them from virgin oil, that only 9% of all plastic that we produce actually gets recycled. This is something that cannot go on further. No matter how good plastics are as a material, we cannot let them pollute our planet. We've all seen the devastating impacts of plastics on marine wildlife. We've learned about microplastics that are on the bottom of the oceans to the tops of mountains. And today, we have to do something standing at this point in time. Starting from 10 years ago, I started working with my colleague Jeannie Yao to learn and understand how we can take these unrecyclable plastics and recycle them. Since then, we've actually worked on multiple technologies. We started by using bacteria and realized that chemistry is a far more scalable solution for this problem than biology. We've also built over the past 4 years a startup team of chemists and engineers to invent a chemical recycling process for polyethylene plastic, which is the least recycled yet most produced plastic for packaging purposes, is used to make all sorts of flexible packagings and films. The process that we've invented takes these long plastic polymers and breaks them down into small chemical building blocks. And these building blocks are not fuels. This is the only technology in the world right now that does this. So in other words, our process is an accelerated composting method for plastics. We've validated this process, demonstrated proof of concept at the lab scale, and we're now working with engineering firms to demonstrate the economics are cost competitive when scaled up. This is a simple rendering of our process at the demonstration scale. So as the plastics are shredded, we use plastics from waste management plants. They're put into a oxidation chemical reaction where in 3 to 6 hours, the plastics are broken down from long polymer chains of billions of carbons into small chemicals. These chemicals then pass through a multi-step purification process where they reach synthesis grade purity. I have here a sample of these chemicals we made in the lab from plastic trash that we source from a waste plant in San Jose. These chemicals today are valuable intermediates to be used to make products, durable products that we all use in our lives, ranging from cars to textiles, to furniture, to electronics, and so on. And today, the demand for these chemicals and materials are in the tens of billions of dollars in market size. And the demand this demand is being filled by virgin oil production. Our process can fill this demand by recycling unrecyclable plastics and displacing oil. At scale, our goal is to cut 5 million tons per year of plastic pollution and 100 million tons per year of CO2 emissions by creating a circular economy and creating revenue streams for cleanup efforts. To prove this, we need to build this demonstration unit, and that's exactly what the ROLEX Awards will help us do. Thank you.
We will now hear US technologist Topher White, who is using mobile technology and artificial intelligence to monitor and save rainforests. Please welcome Topher.
Hey guys. Okay, so I'm here to tell you about how the sound of our living planet might be the most powerful tool available to us to protect it. So I'm going to start by taking you into the rainforest, in the case in Indonesia. When you sort of go there in the forest, it's sort of the overwhelming sounds, the cacophony of noise that hits you the most. This is Indonesia. The animals themselves, you can't see that far in the forest, but the animals themselves speak to each other from a great distance, and it becomes this powerful wave of noise. But just like the animals themselves make noise, threats themselves can also be an issue. They make noises as well. And it's through this, the Rainforest Connection, my organization aims to protect these areas. So how do we do that? Well, first, the very moment that chainsaws used in the forest, we can pick up the sound with the devices in the trees, goes up in the cloud, uses AI to pick out the sounds of those chainsaws, sends an alert to local partners on the ground who can jump on their motorcycles and get out there and stop people on the spot. It turns out this actually works. There's two important parts of that animation you just saw. First is a technology element. We use old phones in boxes up in the trees in the remote rainforest. They sit in a box to protect them with solar panels and powerful microphones. That actually allows us to then work with local partners on the ground to actually send alerts to them so they can show up and actually catch logging trucks on their way into and out of the reserve. In this case, who's actually there? Partnerships are the most important thing because we're not the ones stopping the loggers. Who are those partners? Indigenous tribes, NGOs, people who are there on the ground who can actually stop it. Turns out it works. They can catch this equipment. In that particular case, they caught the equipment. They can stop it. And in other cases, they can actually catch the loggers and arrest them there on the spot. This works. We've taken this beyond the Amazon, but also to Africa, to Indonesia, or in the Amazon. And it turns out that over all this, we've deployed this over the last few years across 5 continents, 10 countries, 3,000 square kilometers of forest protected across a lot of these partnerships. It's really one of the most effective ways to do it. How does this actually matter? Well, it turns out that climate change is the second largest contributor, deforestation is the second largest contributor to climate change, more than all the transportation put together. Illegal logging makes up 90% of logging in the forest. Although deforestation also incorporates farming, logging is the gateway activity to that. Logging is so profitable, they'll cut roads through the forest. That will actually mean those roads then lead to wholesale deforestation. We're going to go back a little bit. Wholesale deforestation that then can lead to the entire forest being destroyed just based on the fact the road's there. If you can stop the logging, you can stop the roads. If you stop the roads, you stop the deforestation. That could be the fastest, cheapest way for us to fight climate change today. But stopping people on the ground is actually not sufficient for the overall protection of the forest. You have to get people interested around that as well. That's why we have an app that allows anyone to listen to the streams from these devices in the forest to your phones at any given time. You can send alerts when an orangutan goes through an area that you care about. Beyond that, we also have to build tools to let scientists themselves listen and understand these things. This is an interface we build that allows these scientists to contribute to our AI and make it smarter. Just being able to add these models makes it important so that we can do really amazing things like this that allow us to essentially listen to the sounds of the forest and pick out all the species, measure these things en masse. And eventually know so much more about what's there. So this is the same stream as before, but through this AI, we're able to pick out the individual species that are there, so we can build interest and turn this into amongst the most powerful databases for sound understanding of the forest. Yeah, so imagine being able to map these areas automatically across years and decades and understand the rise and decline of biodiversity. This is what we do, Rainforest Connection, and we're very proud of it. So we can stop illegal logging. We can stop deforestation. We can use that to effectively fight climate change. We have to think long-term, but act very, very short-term. And so even if 3,000 kilometers of forest is something we're very proud of, we have to protect so much more. Thanks a lot.
Our next finalist comes from Pakistan. Sara Saeed is a public health entrepreneur working to improve access to healthcare and to empower home-based female doctors. Please welcome Sara.
I come from a country of 200 million people, where when a woman is born in a traditional middle-class family, there are only two career options that are considered noble for her. One is being a teacher, and the other, a doctor. However, pursuing an education in these fields isn't motivated by a possibility of long-term impact, but rather to get a good hand in marriage. We call them the doctor brides in Pakistan. Highly educated, trained, but don't practice. Sometimes it's about maternity. I became a doctor bride after having my first daughter myself. I moved to a new city with my daughter, and people thought it was very okay for me to leave my job and everything and stay at home. But mostly, it's when female doctors quit after training. 70% of total workforce in Pakistan is made up of female doctors, but yet only 23% practice. They become doctor brides. This is in a face of very harsh reality in Pakistan. 1 out of 2 people do not get access to healthcare. 28% women still deliver at home. 1 out of 5 children never see their 5th birthday. In fact, we have 1 doctor for 1,000 people in our country. So I made it my life's mission to use this underexploited resources of female doctors to tackle a very large healthcare concern in my country. And thus, it led to the creation of my project, Sehat Kahani. At Sehat Kahani, we connect female doctors to patients in low-income communities using telemedicine or video conferencing. We partner with community clinics which are run by nurses, midwives, or lady health workers. We train them, we upgrade their infrastructure, we train them to use a laptop so that they can connect any patient that comes to their clinic to an online female doctor sitting at home, never been to that community. We also have labs, ultrasounds, tertiary care referrals, and pharmacy in this clinic. We also have a more accessible version for at-home visits for these patients. Sehat Kahani has 25 clinics across Pakistan. We've seen 95,000 patients till date and educated 10 times as many. We have a growing network of 1,500 doctors. But what do you want to do next? We want to expand. We want to take our clinics to 10 more communities where healthcare is not available. We also want to create a clinical module of a mobile application that can be used by doctors and nurses on the go. We're also generating data in communities where data was never present, never generated. We want to use AI and machine learning to make sure that this data is used to create better healthcare for patients. So that is what the ROLEX Award is going to help us to do. Create better healthcare, urgent healthcare for these patients through our doctor brides. Thank you.
Our next finalist is a conservation scientist from Argentina, Pablo Garcia Borboroglu, who is working to save some of the most imperiled seabirds, penguins. Please welcome Pablo.
Good morning, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today. I grew up listening to my grandmother's stories about penguins when she visited them in Patagonia 100 years ago. But the first time I visited a